We are going to talk a little bit today about payments or incentives to influencers and ambassadors. And we think that this is a really interesting topic, a really important topic for a lot of organizations that are thinking about getting started in influencer or ambassador marketing and are worried or maybe not even worried, just interested in how they can make sure that they pay or incentivize the people that they want to be working with appropriately. So I'm going to do a quick introduction and then I'll hand over to Gab for the meat of the presentation. So I don't have any control over this, I don't think. So Gab, I think we'll have the next slide. So I know from the names that I can see popping up that some of you are familiar with this, so I'm not going to dwell on this. But basically, for anyone that is new to us, Freestack quite simply connects brands with content creators, influencers, and ambassadors, specifically in the run, cycle, outdoors, and snow sports sectors. Part of our offering alongside our software solution is that we have a community of content creators. It's currently at around about 1,800 with nearly 28 million reach between them. We have everyone on there from the most micro of micro influencers up to some pretty heavy hitters in terms of their reach. But we are firmly in the micro influencer space. I think it's worth stating that. And we've been running the platform now for 4 years. Freestack has been in existence for 7. And in that 4 years, we've had the opportunity to work with some really fantastic brands. As you can see, there's a few household names on there. But we've also worked with some much more modest-sized brands, some startups, even a couple of one-man bands. So there's something for everybody. I mean, we've built the Freestack platform and our offering in a way that means that as many different organizations can get involved as possible. So whether or not you have the budgets of the likes of some of the household names or a much more modest financial availability, we can definitely help you out. And just to quickly introduce us. My name is Simon. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Freestack. And I'm joined by my colleague, Gabriel Briggs, who's the account manager, one of the account managers here. And Gabriel works closely with all of our clients to make sure that they have the most success possible with their campaigns. So he is spectacularly well positioned, having worked on a number of campaigns for many of our clients to talk through lots of subjects, including this one about payments and incentives. So quick introduction, what we're going to run through. I think this will last around about 40 minutes. That's what we're aiming for, maybe a little less. We're going to talk about why payment matters and why it matters for both parties, the brand as much as the influencer. We're going to talk a little bit about what is included as payment. As a side note, and we're going to mention this at the very end, we have another webinar coming up next week on all of the legal aspects and regulatory aspects of influencer and ambassador marketing. And I'm sure at some point during that, the co-presenters there will talk a little bit about what payment means, both in terms of payment in kind and cash payment. But we're only going to talk about it in terms of definitions. We're going to talk a bit about how you decide on payment, what to pay, when, etc. And then Gab's going to do a bit of myth busting at the end and talk about some of the things you may have heard that we believe aren't true. At which point I will hand over to Gab. Take it away.
Many thanks, Simon. And thank you so much for joining us, everyone. I know there's some familiar names that have been along for a few previous webinars, which is really nice to see, and some new names there as well. So thank you so much for giving up your, where are we, Wednesday afternoon, blending into one a little bit with isolation, but that's all right. And we're really keen to talk about the topic at hand. Payment is definitely the subject that we get the most questions on from clients. And it's something we spend quite a bit of time talking about, which is good because it's really important. But hopefully this session is able to almost preemptively answer some questions that some of you might have. I mean, the reality is this is not a half an hour conversation. It's much more deep and industry and certainly brand specific. But I think we can cover some really valuable ground today in terms of this conversation. And as I say, hopefully answer some questions that you might have and show you how you can sort of better understand what payment is and how you can integrate it within your influencer marketing strategy. So I think a really helpful place to start with this conversation is understand why this is important. And I don't think the point here is to really sell the idea of payment. I sort of trust that the conversation is, we understand that this is an important component to an influencer marketing or ambassador program or campaign. But I think it is sometimes important just to remind ourselves some of the actually really valuable components to payment that do lie within these campaigns. So we've got some key points that I think touch on why it's valuable for brands. There's obviously some key points as to why it's important for content creators. And I've used the word content creator there as a proxy for ambassadors and influencers, essentially anyone that you're working with to create content for your brand. And that'll be a term used throughout this presentation. And I think there are some distinct reasons why payment's important to both. And of course, there's almost a third category, which we'll get to, which is considerations that are mutually beneficial. So I think to begin with, it is important to remind ourselves that brands get a lot out of making sure that they pay. It almost sounds counterintuitive, but the ability for as soon as brands start to pay content creators, it allows them the opportunity to be quite clear in what they're asking for. They're no longer doing, it's not favors that people are doing for others. I had a conversation with someone recently, and they were saying, I don't like doing favors for people. I want there to be a transaction, whether it's financial or doing something for one another. And I think that's really important here, because it means that brands can say, this is what we're giving you, and we want this in return. And it creates a professional starting point for the relationship. It also helps with the quality or the type of content creators that you'll be able to work with. This is really important for recruitment. When you're looking to find the people that you want to work with, having a really clear a reward is the easiest way to save yourself a lot of time and energy trying to find the right people. One, it'll just mean you'll find them quicker, which saves time, money. But two, you'll potentially find people that you're more happy to work with, for want of a better word. So I think it improves the quality is a difficult word to use there, but it improves pool of people that you'll be able to choose from, and which is obviously going to increase the likelihood that you're happy. It also increases the likelihood that content creators are going to go above and beyond for the brand. And I think the word that comes to mind here is respect. I think if brands are really respecting the time of content creators and rewarding them appropriately, that's when relationships start to really form. And that's when content creators go, I'm such a fan of this brand or this even this person that I'm dealing with or product indeed. And that's when they're going to start to go, you know what, I wasn't asked to do this, but I'm going to do an additional, shoe review or whatever it is, because the relationship's solid. There's mutual respect, and let's be honest, that benefits brands. So there's a lot of, this is obviously just 3 reasons to begin with, but there's a lot of reasons why brands need to remind themselves it isn't just to benefit the content creator, the word payment. It is sort of there's some selfish reasons there as well. Content creators benefit, obviously. I think one thing that's really important is the respect that this affords content creators. They do invest a lot of time into what they're doing. And I think it's important, if you are asking for them to do something for you, to respect that and pay them in return. And I think one of the things that I really love about paying, whether it's product, cash or payment in kind, we'll get to the different options in a minute, but it actually allows them to invest in their content creation, which obviously in turn favors the brand. And by that, what I mean is they might spend more time on it. They might divert some of their fee if there is a fee attached to a photographer. They might even invest in photography equipment themselves, for example. So there's a lot of ways that obviously that's great for the content creator, but it does start to benefit the brand again. And if you've started off in a really positive way and provided a really valuable payment in whatever form that is, and the content creator reinvests that in their content, there's this beautiful virtuous cycle that starts to form. And if that relationship continues, everyone starts to benefit from the rewards. So that leads me on to the next point, which is where there are really clear mutual benefits. I'm a little bit conscious that those points that we've touched on already are essentially mutually beneficial already. But I think the big one here is the professionalism. The moment there is a clear reward from the brand to the influencer or the content creator, it really does step up the professionalism of the collaboration. All of these things lead to longer term relationships being possible if indeed it's sustainable for both. It's a really promising start if there's that respect early, that holds you in good stead to be able to continue the relationship. And I think the final point is, which is one of my absolute favorites, is it secures commitment from either side. The brand and the content creator both have skin in the game. They've got a real reason to be able to, the brand's invested. They want to see the campaign through. The content creators got something to chase. They've got a bit of a carrot, so they're going to commit and they've got skin in the game. So I think that's a really good reason. If that's the only reason, I think it's well worth investing in a reasonable payment to make sure that the campaign is sort of committed to from all parties. So I've used the word payment a lot already, and I'm conscious that the title of this relates to payments and incentives. So I wanted to touch on a little bit before we get to how we pay and how we understand how we allocate payment. What do we actually mean, and what can this mean for different brands? So what is included as payment? So Simon alluded to it earlier on, and typically payment can take two forms: direct cash incentives, so literally paying money, or payment in kind. Obviously, cash incentives is a bit easier to understand, and there's some associated benefits with that. And payment in kind can cover a wide range of things. But here are some key benefits, I think, to both that we need to keep in mind. I think quite quickly we'll go through these, but cash incentives absolutely respect the time commitment. It's the most simple way of respecting the fact that this is a job for some people, or this is something they do to a professional standard, even if it is a part-time thing that they do. It most simply respects the time commitment because you're literally paying for time. It is a really simple form of transaction. Giving someone 100 quid is very, very, functionally it's very easy, but it's actually really easy to understand as well. And that leads me on to the next point, which is if your offer is 100 quid versus a position in an event, some kit, maybe some nutrition, a voucher for 6 months, the 100 quid is so much easier to understand, even if the total value to someone is actually same from a financial perspective. It's so much easier to communicate when recruiting the cash incentive because it's it's a language that everyone understands, money. So that is a real benefit and saves you a lot of time in the recruitment phase. Also, I mean, this is maybe less of a benefit of cash and maybe a downside of payment in kind, but there isn't at a certain point, there's diminishing returns from product. So you might find that, if you're a hat brand, the first few hats that you send to someone is met with wonderful gusto and enthusiasm, and there's a lot of excitement. The reality is the 5th, 6th, 10th hat that you seed, or if you're a shoe brand or a sock brand, that once you get to 10 plus units of that product, there's diminished value. I mean, there might be some people in this world that disagree with me, but money has nowhere near the same diminishing returns. So the reality is, you might be able to get the first few items of product in someone's hands and you get that maximum level of stoke or excitement. And then maybe that's followed up with cash because, you want to overcome those diminishing returns. So that's certainly a vote for cash. I think one of the really important ones that we're seeing more and more is the ability to assess the value of a campaign is really simple if you've invested a financial cash incentive, because there's no ambiguity. If you're sending kit or entry into events, it actually isn't that clear what financial value you input into your when you're trying to understand your return or your cost per engagement. Is it how much it costs you? Is there a time component there? Is it the retail value or the wholesale value? There's all sorts of questions that brands do quite differently, and so there's no sort of uniform answer across the industry. There is absolutely uniform. The value of money is uniform in across industries, between industries, it's really easy. And so it creates for a real simple evaluation at the end of the campaign. That all being said, there's huge benefits with payment in kind. So the biggest one, and the reason we see this, it's so common, is it obviously allows businesses with restricted cash flow to make a start. And this doesn't mean that brands aren't well established or anything, but the reality is it might be more difficult to get approval from the finance director for 10 grand than it is to use some excess stock. Perhaps you over-ordered and your forecasting was a little bit off and you think you're going to have a little bit more stock. It's probably a bit easier to get approval to use that as payment in kind than it is from the finance director. So sometimes the cash flow situation obviously dictates that. And the thing I absolutely love about that is it means that so many different brands have the opportunity to play in this space. So I think it creates a really inclusive opportunity for a lot of different brands, depending on where you're at. It also leverages brand assets and relationships. So we'll touch on this in a moment, but this is a really good opportunity to be able to set yourself apart from your competitors. If you have unique brand assets and really interesting and unique relationships, you can provide something that your competitors can't. And we'll have a look at what that might look like. And along a similar vein, you can create unique experiences for content creators if indeed you've got those brand assets and relationships. So there's some really distinct reasons why either have advantages, and it really does depend on where you are at as a business. I suppose the really promising thing from all this is there is no right or wrong answer. It would be problematic if everyone went one way or the other. And the reality is influencer marketing works because there is a combination of both types of payment. So I think we should be encouraged to embrace different forms of payment at different times for any business, really. So let's continue on that last point, which is about unique opportunities. So this slide is 2 examples of opportunities people within the Freestack community had to work with brands. And this information comes from a conversation we had with our community. So we often reach out to our community of content creators, which, as Simon mentioned, we have just shy of 2,000 content creators in the run, cycle, endurance sports and outdoor space. And we're often talking to them to understand where they're at and how they feel about different aspects of influencer marketing. And one question we really wanted to understand was more or less what we're discussing today. So what collaborations have they done that they derived a lot of value, and what really stuck out for them? Now, interestingly, maybe because it doesn't provide a really good story or anecdote, but interestingly, very few of the responses that we got back were, I worked with this brand and they were really generous in their payment. The answers that we got back were very much about unique experiences and once in a lifetime, money can't buy opportunities. So on the left, we've got Joe. Joe runs and stuff. Joe hadn't run a marathon. She adored the London Marathon as a kid. She always watched it and wanted to get involved. She's an avid runner. And obviously being, from the UK, is always a bucket list thing for her. And she just couldn't get an entry. Like, certainly I've found that to be the case, and this year wasn't helpful. But she couldn't get in, and there was a collaboration that provided her an opportunity not only to run the London Marathon, but to actually be coached by an Olympian in the lead up to it. And this was amazing for her. And she did it. She did it in 2018. She's been posting about it as recently as last week. It still sticks out to her as a really career defining as a runner moment. So a great example of where a unique experience really stuck in her mind, and she still posts about it. So the value continues 2 years after the fact. Similarly, we've got Daniel on the right here. He's a runner and cyclist from Germany and had the opportunity, Team Katusha Alpecin. So for those that don't know, they are a professional cycling team, and I think again, maybe this was 2018 at the tour, they invited a few people along to be able to have like the backstage pass at the tour. And so they rode with some of the team. He got to ride with Jens Voigt, who, again, for those that know, is an absolute German legend of the sport. He's now retired. And this was a really incredible experience from Daniel. He still has it as a highlight in his stories if you jump on his Instagram. And he talks about these almost exclusively when you ask him what's the favorite collaborations he's done. It's things like this. He's also had the opportunity to run with Kipchoge, so he's been particularly lucky in the collaborations he's had. But I think it really does demonstrate these are if these are opportunities a brand has, I think it really supplements payment or any other cash incentive that you do throughout the year, if it's possible. But I think there is that consideration that we want to return to, which is these are unique, which is good, but that means that they're inherently rare. Like there's only one Tour de France or one London Marathon a year, so it's not a year-round thing that you can do. So I think when the opportunity arises, it's something to be latched onto. But the reality is there's 11 other months of the year that these events aren't happening. So it's certainly worth thinking what you can you do on a month-to-month basis, and then perhaps these moments create a peak for you in your calendar. So hopefully that gives us just a platform that we can move forward with, just helping us understand what we actually mean when we talk about payment. And of course, that can be a 2-hour conversation in and of itself, and it's so highly dependent on the brand. But I think the really important conversation we want to have is, how do you decide on your payment? So we're going to have a look into that. So just at the risk of repeating ourselves, the first step is, of course, identifying your payment method. Are you going to go down the route that is payment in kind? Does that work best for your brand? Or are you thinking, nope, we have the availability of cash, and we like how neat and simple it is to go down that route, so we're going to provide a cash incentive? Or maybe it's both. And the reality is that's really common. If you're doing a shoe review and you want to provide a cash incentive, you're probably going to need to provide the shoes as well. So there's a combination of the two. But I think generally you want to prioritize one or the other as a focus. And I think that's what we can go into at the moment. So we'll start with payment in kind. I think the reality is this is probably the more difficult one to talk about from a general perspective. So like when you're setting up a campaign, the most important thing to do is making sure that you're asking yourself the right questions. And so that's what we're going to try to help you with here. Obviously, a cycling bike brand is really different to a brand that produces socks or running shoes or hats, or indeed an app or a service. So it's going to be very difficult to get into very specific examples. But if you're asking yourself these questions, it almost doesn't matter what you provide. And if you're going down the payment in kind route, you can hopefully get a good understanding at the end of these 8 or so questions. So the first thing is obviously whether it's feasible to supply your product service. That might be from a logistical perspective, or it might be what the next point addresses, which is from a value perspective. So again, we'll use the example of a sock brand. It's super easy to be able to send socks. It's much less easy to send a brand new carbon fiber bike, both logistically and from a value perspective. So if indeed you're answering the question and thinking, okay, well, we make treadmills, so it's really difficult on all fronts to be able to provide it, there are workarounds. Like maybe it's something that's rented out, and you spend 1 month with one influencer, another with another influencer, and so on. So there are obviously workarounds, but this is definitely the starting point that you want to begin with. What brand partnerships exist? So you might have a collaboration. If you are an event, for example, very common that you'll have sponsors. Maybe there's a nutrition brand. Maybe there's an apparel brand that partner with you, and between you can bundle a really interesting offer. And the beauty of this, and for those that attended our previous webinar will know this, the beauty of that is if you are indeed partnering with if you're an event and you're partnering with a nutrition brand, and that's part of the reward, the influencer is going to be posting about that nutrition brand, and you're going to be able to go to them and say, this wasn't part of your sponsorship. However, we effectively got you a de facto influencer marketing campaign because we included it in our offer, and look at all these wonderful posts that have come out. So you strengthen those relationships and assets. conversely, do you sponsor events so it can go the other way? So if you're sponsoring, Virgin sponsoring the London Marathon, I'm sure there's plenty of activations they can get out of the fact that they've got that sponsorship deal. So certainly one to consider. Obviously, it doesn't have to be on the scale of VLM. Do you have any athlete collaborations? Now, we saw an example of Daniel riding with, Jens Voigt, Eliud Kipchoge. It doesn't have to be at that level. It could be a past Olympian that maybe name recognition doesn't happen to the same extent. But Joe was coached by an Olympian, and there was a suite of Olympians that coached in that program. And maybe that's something that you can have access to. They might be a past Olympian, and that carries a lot of weight and is really valuable as well. So it doesn't have to be to the extent of what we saw with Daniel. Now, are there any opportunities to travel or particular experiences? We've seen that a little bit already. But again, in that questionnaire that when we spoke to our community, overwhelmingly the response was we want opportunities to enrich our lives. The reason we invest so much time in creating this content is not necessarily to get rich. I think there's probably more time sensitive ways you could invest in getting rich, but the experiences that influencers can be afforded is sometimes really incredible, and I think that's something that people truly value. And again, we'll come back to it. It's an opportunity to distinguish yourselves from your opponents or your competitors. So this is certainly something to consider. And I think just to tie that all together, can you bundle these? So there might be a small athlete collaboration that you can include with your sponsored event and your partner nutrition brand all come together. And there's 5 or 6 things that you're bundling. Of course, it's a little bit more difficult to communicate when you're coming to recruitment, but of course it's a stronger proposition. So, if you can overcome that communication challenge, which I have no doubt that you will, that's a really valuable way of harnessing everything that you can get out of the payment in kind method. So now let's have a look at the cash incentive. So this is something that we're really keen to almost take you a bit of a step-by-step process of how you can systematically understand what cash incentives might be right for your campaigns. But the first thing, like anything that we do, the first thing that you need to do is define your objective. So the 3 sort of pillars for us, particularly in the influencer marketing world, are awareness campaigns that are surrounded creating user-generated content. So populating your social feeds, creating a bank of content that you can use as a brand, or much more directly trying to grow sales and convert leads. And of course, the word affiliate is often used with these campaigns. So for each objective, there are some different ways that we can sort of quantify, different ways that we can, or things that we can look at for how we're charging. So when we're doing awareness campaigns, we're much more likely to say, okay, what's the reach of this person? How much engagement do they get? How many posts are we asking them to do? User-generated content's a bit of a different story. It's all about the quality of the content and how many images you're being provided. What's the value of that? Sales and leads, it's perhaps a little bit of an obvious one, but it's much more about link clicks, affiliate sales. Oftentimes we'll do a commission-based payment for these. And so they're the things that we start to consider in terms of payment. And this is how we start to approach step 2, which is forecasting based on those objectives. So there are like sort of quantitative ways that we can look to assess this. So for awareness, and we're going to investigate this in much more detail for awareness, but things like cost per engagement are really key to understand when you're forecasting how much you're going to be paying influencers. And we use something called earned media value, which we'll explore in a little bit more detail. User-generated content, again, there's maybe the difficulty here is there's a qualitative review that you'll likely have to do internally about the quality of the content and how on brand it is. Is that really valuable to you? Or maybe it's a really nice photo, but probably not something you're going to use. So there's that is an interim step, but then you want to be looking at the cost per image and what bank of content that you're growing and how much value that is to you. Sales and leads, again, cost per click. So it's almost a little bit more similar to the Facebook marketing that we're familiar with, cost per click and cost per impressions. That's much more how you're likely to structure it. And with this one, the difference is there's often affiliate link that you're going to be paid a percentage commission. So maybe you'll say, 5 or 7% of sales will go to the person if it's been generated through their link, their unique link for a particular influencer. And there might also be a fixed fee in addition to that. So you might say 100 quid for the post, and then an additional 7% per sales that you generate. So you can start to see the user-generated content. It's a bit more literal. How many images do we get or ask for, and how much do we pay per image? Sales and leads, again, it's probably a little bit more sort of simple in terms of there's a small fee, but it's mostly about commission. Awareness is definitely the most popular type of influencer campaign. It's certainly where a lot of brands will start and then potentially move into one of the other two options. But it's by far the one we get the most questions on, and I think it's probably the more difficult one to understand. So we're going to take a moment to investigate this a little bit more and break down what a process might be for you to start with a KPI and then go, how much do we pay people to be able to achieve that KPI? So let's start with something really simple. So let's say that you're a brand and you've decided that awareness is really important. Maybe you're moving into a new market. Maybe there's a new product. Maybe you're trying to position yourself as a brand in a different way to what you've previously done. And you say, 1 million impressions is what we need to do that. And we're going to say that of those 1 million impressions, of the 1 million people that literally view our post or the posts, we want 6% of them to be engaging with it. So that would be 60,000 impressions. So we want 1 million impressions, 60,000 engagements. So 1 million impressions, 60,000 engagements. So that's what the KPI has been set for you. And you've got to understand a little bit about, okay, what's the cost there and what's the cost per person or per post? So to do that, we encourage earned media value as a really good way of being able to understand this. So earned media value is literally a way of providing a monetary value to the buzz around your brand by people that are posting outside of your brand. So it's not posts on your brand social media feed. It's people external to you. And so obviously influencers are certainly people that we can look to calculate the earned media that you get as a brand. And these numbers that you can see on your screen, you can see that we literally assign a dollar value to each, like, impression, share, retweet, etc. And for simplicity, we're assuming this will be an Instagram campaign, and conscious that typically we'll use stories as well. But for the maths, we'll do just a feed-based Instagram campaign. And you can see 3 different numbers there. And these numbers aren't, the reality is there are no numbers in the industry or in the world that are like verified or consolidated. People there's a little bit of ambiguity about what numbers are appropriate to use, and it does vary a little bit between industry. But what we've got here is an aggregation of the brands that we work with, very specifically in the outdoors and endurance sports sector. And these are sort of quite major brands that use this, and there's some real consistency in the brands that do use it. And so we've got some averages here, and they're really consistent. We've used this quite a bit, and it spits out some really consistent information. And I think the important thing here is that you need to be consistent with the numbers that you use. Obviously, it doesn't matter so much you being able to compare to your competitors, because it's an internal metric, really. As long as you're consistent internally, that should be fine. So for every impression, the value is 0.006 cents in US dollars. This is likes are $1 and comments are $4.50. So to understand more, what we need to do is put this into a bit of a table and do some calculations. So we'll start from the left of the screen at KPIs. So we already know this. Our KPI is 1 million impressions at a 6% engagement rate, which is 60,000 engagements. Now, something to just include here is around 95% of your engagements will be likes. So we've used that maths. It is a bit of an assumption, but for this demonstrative purposes, it should be perfectly sufficient. So we've got 95%, which is 57,000 likes and 3,000 comments. And then we just do some simple math. So we times it by the earned media value calculations or values that we have. And then we get the value on the second to right column there. So those million impressions are worth $6,000 US. Those 57,000 likes are worth $57,000 because we times it by 1. And interestingly, those 3,000 comments at $4.50, $13,500. So we sum those numbers up to get the value of those KPIs, the value of this campaign, which is $76,500. So that's a really important point about earned media value is that 76,000 number is the one that you are able to go to your boss, that you're able to compare year on year. This is the one easily digestible number that you're able to quote as the earned media value of this campaign that you've done. So that's the number you hold on to. But we can't stop there for the purpose of this exercise. We need to understand. We need to break that down a little bit more. So I've got a number in a box on the right there, which is 15,300. Now, what that means is earned media value. If you want to be a little bit competitive and you want to challenge yourself a little bit, a really good goal is to try to have 5 times your investment in earned media value. So if we invest $15,000, we times that by 5 and we get to $76,000. That means that we've multiplied our investment by 5 times to get the earned media value, which is really, it's an ambitious target, but it's a good target to aim for. So we're going to assume that we're going to have a wonderful campaign and we're going to aim for that 5 times return on investment. So that means that we've invested $15,000 to get our KPIs that we want. Again, need to break that down a little bit more. So the thing that we'll just quickly address on this slide is, where do we get the majority of that $76,000? Is it impressions? Is it likes? Is it comments? I think you can quite clearly see that 75% of that $76,000 is actually coming from likes, the 57 grand from likes. If you combine comments, so now if we're looking at engagements on the whole, it's actually 92% of the total value comes from engagements, while it's only 8%, the $6,000 there, that come from impressions. So when we're forecasting, this is a really important point. We don't want to be focused on reach, the number of followers someone has, the impressions, the number of views or impressions that an image gets. It really is, the value is so much in the engagements, the likes and the comments. So from a forecasting perspective, that's what we're going to focus on. So let's do that. So we need 60,000 engagements. Now, we can divide the maths up in many different ways. And so we've just gone with a simple number, which is really realistic, but it certainly makes the maths easy. We can say that, let's say that we average 1,000 engagements per post. So probably working with people about anywhere between 10 and 20,000 followers. So obviously, if we have that many engagements per post, we need 60 posts, 60 times 1,000. Again, the maths can work in many different ways. If we want 60 posts, maybe it's 10 influencers posting 6 times, 30 influencers posting 2 times, you name it. You can structure it a few different ways. But what's important to remember here, and we'll touch on this in a second, is we're saying we're averaging 1,000 engagements per post. The reality is you'll have someone that gets 2,000, you'll get someone with 500. As long as the average works out, that's what's really key. So how much does a post cost us? And this is where we're going to get to our answer that we want. $250 comes from the 15,000 that we need to invest to get the KPIs, divided by the number of posts, which is 60. So that brings us to $250. However, that's a bit of a useless number because, as we mentioned a moment ago, the engagements vary a little bit depending on the person. So if we break it down even further, we divide 250 by the number of engagements that we expect per post. It's 0.25 cents. And this is the golden number that we need to use going forward. So if we say an engagement costs us 0.25 cents, we can go out to the world of influencers and understand the value that they're going to bring to us, or what we need to spend to be able to work with them to get our KPIs. So if an influencer averages 1,200 engagements on their post, and we multiply our 0.25 cents per engagement, they're going to cost us $300. Similarly, influencer B, 800 engagements per post. Reasonable to suggest that the brand might spend a little bit less on them from a value perspective, and you can do the same maths and you get $200 per post. So hopefully this just gives a real sense of the importance of having informed data and having a consistent approach to be able to understand the different value of different influencers. I'm a little bit conscious of time, so we'll move on, but we'll just show you some examples of why it's really important to have that sort of structured, data-informed approach. So a myth that you might see, if this is a topic that interests you, which hopefully it is, you might have Googled this question before. And typically what you get when you Google this question is a bunch of rate cards. Influencers charge X. There's obviously some inherent limitations with them. They're really blunt instruments, because you have a rate card that looks something like this, and it just simply has a range of followers versus a range of payment. They don't scale per post. So if you're working with someone over a year, perhaps the per post value might decrease, and this doesn't take that into consideration. It's industry agnostic, so it doesn't define whether this is for fashion, for running, for whatever industry you're working in, and of course there are some considerations to be had there. It totally ignores the quality of the content, and this is a huge one. Someone with 3,000 followers might be the most beautiful photographer, and if you're doing a user-generated content campaign, that's absolutely your focus. There's no way you're paying them $75 per post. And the biggest one, which we've seen why it's super important, is there's no mention of engagement here. It's all about followers. And the reality is, there's earned media value doesn't have a value for your followers. It has a value for your impressions, but even that is relatively insignificant. So it sort of misses the most important part in terms of forecasting value. Okay, so to conclude, we can see that providing payment to content creators is really important, and it's mutually beneficial. Different content creators will value different things. So you need to be really conscious that to work with one particular person, that you might not know what incentivizes them, or if you have a very particular incentive, it might not appeal to everyone, and that's good, because it means that there'll be different people wanting different things. So you'll always have someone interested in what you're offering, but different people appeal to different things. You've really got to use as much qualitative, but certainly as much quantitative information as you can. Don't simply rely on blunt instruments, and that's of course the final point. Use data to inform. Don't rely on those rate cards. But of course, if you find this to be a little bit confusing, or you're not sure, of course, talk to an expert. We're always happy to chat. If you just want to run something past us, please do. We want to make sure campaigns succeed. Absolutely. So on that point, if you do have any questions, we would love to help. We do love having these conversations, and hopefully this deck allows us to have a bit more of an informed conversation. And we've got years of managing ambassador programs and influencer campaigns. So if you need any help with that or want to talk about it, please do drop us a line. We'll show you an email address in a moment. And of course, we have, as Simon mentioned, the Freestack platform and our community of ambassadors, which will certainly help you along your way if this is something you're looking to do. And I think the key point that we want to mention is we're really keen to work together as an industry at a time like this. So at the moment, we're offering 50% off campaigns for the first 3 months that you work with us, if indeed you do want to collaborate and work on an influencer or ambassador campaign. So that's for a limited time only, but we're really keen to collaborate and work with some brands and help everyone through the difficult time that we've found ourselves within. So if that's of interest, please do get in touch. Again, we'll show the email on the next slide. Simon mentioned it at the top of the presentation, but we do have some future webinars coming up. We're going to keep the ball rolling. The first one is very much about how to build a community of content creators. So understanding how to vet content creators, who you're looking to work with, how you build and structure that, and making sure that you've got the quality people that your brand is looking to work with. And that's next Tuesday at 5 p.m. British Standard Time. And then the next one is all about the regulations around influencer and ambassador, working with influencers and ambassadors. And we're going to get an expert on in the field, and she's a lawyer and works very closely in this space and is absolutely the expert in the industry. So she'll be able to shed some really important information about what brands need to be considering when working with influencers and what regulations will affect them. So that'll be next Thursday at 4 p.m. So we'll be sending an email to both those, to links to both of those. but that'll be on our LinkedIn as well if in doubt and you want to get involved. And this is the email address, simon@freestack.com, if you do have any questions. But from me anyway, thank you very much for giving up some of your time. Conscious it went a couple of minutes long, but I really do appreciate you sticking around and listening. So thank you so much for joining us.
I'll just quickly add, Gabriel's email address is gabriel@freestack.com, and I would like to say a very big thank you to Gab for preparing and delivering what I thought was a really excellent presentation. So thank you very much, Gab. We'll be back next Tuesday.